let's start off with your most stubborn gremlin. So either one on the screen, put a star on the screen for your most stubborn gremlin, or if your most stubborn gremlin isn't on the screen, put it into chat, because appreciate these are not all of the gremlins, or these words might not feel quite right. But only allowed 1 star this morning, so I'm going to ask you for your most. I'm going to ask you to prioritize your gremlins. What is your most stubborn gremlin? What have we got? If you've not used the stars before, it's few options, annotate, stamp and then star. Sarah's very helpfully put that into chat for you. Orna, okay, yeah, not experienced enough, not good enough yet. Please don't worry if you can't use the stars. But yeah, we're just starting off. I think it's very hard to cage lots of gremlins all at the same time. And I think understandably, lots of these feel familiar. Of course, we all have a bit of fear of failing. That's actually quite smart. Of course, there are times where we just don't feel good enough. But I think the thing that we're most interested in is going, okay, well, which is the one that we want to prioritize? What do we want to do something about now, in the here and now? And it's just always interesting just to see. I'm just going to move myself out of the way. Which are the ones that are sort of winning, albeit we don't want them to win. So we've got here lots of people saying not good enough. And then a smattering of stars, I would say, everywhere else, just looking at the chat as well. Yeah, don't worry if you can't annotate. Yeah, comparison coming up a fair bit, coming up in the chat as well. A few people saying presenting. Conflict, definitely, a bit like me. For those of you who listen to lots of podcast episodes, you'll know that's one I work really hard on. That fear of being found out. That could also be called imposter syndrome. So if that word, if you sort of go, oh, imposter syndrome, in which case it gets a star. But yeah, we just call it fear of being found out. Okay, let me just let the last few people in. Okay. So lots of stars all over the place here. Let's just get rid of those. But we've prioritized. Yeah, interesting. Lots of people saying not being heard. That's interesting. So kind of that a gremlin around, like, are people actually listening to me? Almost like, is what I'm saying important? Is it worth being said? Interesting one. Right, let's delete those stars. Okay, so you've now thought a little bit about which is your most stubborn gremlin. A few things I'd like you to jot down. So I'm going to ask you to do a bit of this kind of live for yourself, but you don't need to put this in chat. Because as I said, I sort of want to really dive into your gremlin today rather than talking about them generally. So first thing I'd like you to do is to just note down, when do you think that stubborn gremlin that you've got, when is that gremlin most likely to show up? When is that gremlin most likely to show up? Can you be really specific? Maybe not. There might be some gremlins where you just feel like it's always with you. But for some gremlins, you might say, oh, actually, it's is it triggered by something? A meeting, a moment, a person, I don't know, a day of the week. The more tired you are, the more likely the gremlin is to come to life. Actually, that's exactly what Elaine's saying. So yeah. When you're new in a role, yeah, if you don't mind sharing in chat, that's great. When you're unsure about something, I often think the bridge to moving from general awareness of knowing what your gremlins are to action. So we always want to bridge from awareness to action, because without that, there's no change. We don't do anything about it. I think it's being as specific as you possibly can. Because then when it's vague and when it's abstract, it's very hard to do anything about. I think most people, from what we've seen, have pretty good awareness of their gremlins. It's the action bit that's the hard bit. Yeah, when you're getting paid for something interesting. Yeah, so it could be maybe some common ones that I'm just sort of seeing people say. So maybe when you're doing something for the first time. So when you're doing something for the first time, or just something that's quite new. Quite a few people saying certain people. Let's just see if there's anything else. Lots of people talk about newness, maybe newness and uncertainty, which is interesting. Yeah, and then maybe there is a point about your own individual sort of energy, stress levels. Yes, I'm interested when you're passionate about something, but you don't know how to communicate what you think in a way that takes lots of things into account. That's really specific. That's good. Like at least you know. Doesn't make it better yet, but at least you know. People with different styles and personalities. Yeah. Sorry, I can't quite work out your first name, but that's definitely the one for me. When I think about gremlins, and my conflict gremlin, when somebody is particularly direct in their style, that my gremlin is much more likely to escape. So I just know that now. I'm like, if someone has just got, you know, like a very sort of black and white, everything's very, thank you, Maria. Everything's very definitive. They sort of don't see the shades of grey. That's very different to me. And I've said before, I used to label different as difficult, and that's definitely that's on me. Sometimes people are difficult, but most of the time those people just had a very different style to me. And so, you know, that point about taking ownership for your own gremlins. Now, we never excuse bad behavior. Of course we don't. But what we're just trying to spot is like, okay, is it bad behavior, or actually am I just blaming people because of a gremlin that I've got, which was definitely true for me. I definitely worked with people who weren't trying to be difficult. They were just quite definitive and quite direct and quite challenging in their style. Yeah, that's interesting, Corinne. Maybe a few of you are saying things that I think, you know, when it matters to me, when maybe a piece of work matters to me, I'm passionate about something, you know, I want to do a good job. And then maybe that's when the gremlin really starts to shout. You know, we talk about who are you listening to? Are you sort of listening to yourself, your sort of best self, or are you listening to your gremlin? Your gremlin in charge of you, or are you in charge of your gremlin? And maybe that's a moment where I always feel like, and maybe this is taking the sort of the gremlins too far, the gremlins sort of sense, you know, like a moment of weakness. They sense a sort of gap and they're like, oh, this actually matters to Sarah. This could make a difference. And then they're like, then that's when they sort of start getting a bit louder. They sort of turn the volume up on them. So loads of different whens there. Yeah, when you're in a space of low energy, Anna, interesting. So just know your own when. And again, if you can be really specific, almost like Sam did there, where he was sort of very clearly going, it's sort of in this exact moment, I just know that my gremlins really enjoy coming out to play. Then it's much easier to get to, okay, so what am I going to do in those moments? You've spotted the situation. That's the outcome that we're looking for here. Like spot the situation. So now we know our gremlin, we know our most stubborn gremlin. We've spotted the situation. And just notice for yourself what happens when your gremlin is in charge. Or often, that's why I often put it in brackets, what doesn't happen. So again, just note down for yourself now, in this specific situation you've now got in mind, what are you not doing? What is it something that is visible? So sometimes this is visible, sometimes this is invisible. This might be hidden to other people. Don't forget your gremlins really like staying hidden because it gives them lots of power. So do you, like Joe and Laura saying, do you procrastinate? So actually is what's missing, maybe what goes in the brackets is action. Claire, yeah, really good one, people pleasing. Do you, just sort of agree even when you don't agree? Do you just start saying yes? Sheilin, I'm definitely with you. I just go quiet. Other people talking about, yeah, not speaking up. Perhaps you overthink. Lack of action efficiency. Some people get aggressive. You know, that's sort of the opposite. And that's no worse than going silent. It just sort of comes out in a different way. Aggressive or defensive. I'm somebody who blushes. So yeah, physical reaction. So maybe it's blushing. Lots of people talking about overthinking. Heart race. Yeah, your heart races. I definitely still find that. So if somebody directly disagrees with me, my heart, I can, you don't notice that you've got a heart until you do. Does that make sense to anyone? And I find that when my gremlins come out, I'm like, oh, I remember I've got a heart, because you can feel it. You can feel it beating. Yeah, Corinne, you stop listening. yeah, Lucy, you maybe start blaming the other person in your head. Yeah, you're probably not kind of blaming them out loud, but you're probably thinking, well, this is not about me. You become demotivated. Nicole, yeah, maybe then it awakens some of the other gremlins. It's the last thing we want in that moment. Okay, so we've got lots of useful whens here. Over prepare, yeah, Jerry, that's a really common one. Particularly if you have a gremlin around, not smart enough, maybe not knowing enough, being put on the spot. Often people will say to me, well, my action then is I'm going to prepare more so that I know even more going into that meeting. But my worry is always then we're setting ourselves up to fail, because there will always be a question we don't know the answer to. We can never know everything. Just watch out for, and we always do this with our gremlins, often when we're thinking about actions, putting yourself on a pedestal that you would never put other people on. So if you were giving other people advice about this gremlin, your expectations would be realistic, would be pragmatic. When you then put expectations on yourself, they're so much higher. So often I will even say to people, as you're working through your gremlin, imagine your best friend has this gremlin. Someone you really care about, your partner, someone in your family. What advice would you give them? And then just work out, do you take your own advice? You know, like sometimes we're not very good at taking our own advice. And remember that point here about when we're trying to now think about what we want to do differently, it's all about having okay expectations. This is not us at our best. This is us doing our best. So we sort of need to reduce our own expectations of ourselves, which might sound a bit counterintuitive, but I think you're much more likely to move forward when you get into this okay expectations territory. Certainly was my experience. I started off sort of expecting myself to be as brilliant as I want to be all the rest of the time in these moments, and nothing changed. It's too hard. It's too far from where you're starting. So just sort of lower those expectations a little bit. Now, a final question. And actually, we don't talk about this loads in the Gremlins book, so I don't think we talked about it loads in the podcast. But for you, why do you want to change? So other than, of course, we all want to be more confident. We know that building our self-belief is going to help us in our squiggly careers, but they're quite big. They're quite big things. Specifically for you, why should you care? What's in it for you when you're thinking about caging your gremlins? And there was definitely something that came out. I'll give an example from Helen in a second, on Monday, which I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because I actually think people's motivations, again, are very individual. And I don't think it's a motivation to just be like, oh, well, obviously it's the right thing to do, or it's a good thing to do. It's probably not enough. It's probably not enough of a motivator. So yeah, Laura, if you can see that it holds you back, that might be a specific enough motivator. And you might for yourself be able to go even further. Like, it holds me back from, I would try and add the from applying for jobs, saying yes to things I know I'd be good at. What does it hold you back from? Rachel, yeah, feeling better about yourself. To stop spending energy on this. Yeah, Louise, I think that is a brilliant payoff. I used to, a lot of my headspace would be taken up particularly by conflict. Particularly when I worked in a job where there was kind of more of that probably than I have today. And I would spend a lot of time sort of worrying about other people. You know, like your headspace was taken up by other people and by conflict and how to get better at it. And it gets exhausting. And that actually, once I got some sort of techniques, even like coping mechanisms, you could call them, the headspace sort of went from like this to like this, which is much more fun, much better place to be. Yeah, quality of life, takes the pressure off. Use that energy, really nice. I love that there from Karine around, well, what are you going to do instead? Use that energy for creativity, for new experiences. Protect your boundaries, really good one from Claire there. Yeah, your boundaries will be better because you've caged this gremlin. That's a good way to think about this. What will be better because you've done something about this gremlin? One of the things that Helen was talking about with one of her gremlins on Monday was a real motivator for her is helping other people, supporting our listeners. So she sometimes has a gremlin about not being expert enough or knowledgeable enough. And then when she's interviewing someone on the podcast who might be very academic, she'll sometimes feel like, oh, but I'm not as academic as this person, or I'm not smart enough. And that might stop her asking a question. So in that situation that I've just described, what happens, she maybe doesn't ask like an obvious question or a question that she's got for fear of basically looking stupid. When I was then talking to her about why she might change, what she definitely got to, the fundamental motivator for her was she really wants to, she really wants to help our listeners. She really cares about our listeners. But beyond anything else, she wants to do a good job for our Squiggly Career community. So we explored loads of different things, but it was only when we got to that I could see that that was enough of a sort of motivator for her to try to do something different, to ask the obvious question, to not feel fearful if someone answers in a way where it's like, maybe you should have known that already. I did interview someone for the podcast this week where I did ask lots of those questions. I don't have the same gremlins. And they definitely responded in a way where it was like, oh, you should know all this already. I got a lot of first naming, like, well, Sarah. And at times I honestly felt like I was being told off, but because it's not your gremlin, it doesn't have quite the same impact. I was like, oh, I'm happy to go with it. I didn't feel kind of intimidated by that. But if that had been Helen in that situation, that would have been a real moment where a gremlin might have come out to play and she might have thought, oh, I should be asking him more sophisticated questions. So know your motivation. What is your driver for making this change? Lovely, Sam. Yeah, feeling more at ease. Yeah, I really like that. Stop the sometimes ragey feelings. Yeah, never good for us. Yeah, and it is a bit exhausting. Right, let's just get rid of some of the little random stars we've got. So, if you need to do a bit more work on this, as I said, I think this is the bridge from sort of knowing to doing. We talked about the knowing doing gap. And if you have listened to Dolly and Daisy this week, yeah, they did an amazing job of being really empathetic about gremlins. So I just wanted to try out one of those techniques that I mentioned there around kind of being your own best friend when it comes to your gremlins. If someone was talking to you and they got the same gremlin as you, and they're somebody who you really care about, you want to support them in their career, what's one bit of advice that you would give to them? So really think of who that person is. Imagine it is your sister, brother, friend at work, someone you've known for a long time, and they say to you, oh, I always feel like I'm going to get found out. I've got a bit of imposter syndrome creeping in. I've really got a fear of presenting, whatever your gremlin might be. What advice would you give to someone you really care about? Yeah. Do you expect them to know everything? Why do you expect? So a bit about expectation management. Yeah. Lovely, Laura. Stick to your boundaries because you'll have better impact. Really nice. Really good, Sarah. Yes, start small. Starting small is great advice for gremlins. Yeah, what else have we got? Lovely, Joe. Just remind people to sort of, run your own race. I feel like that's what you're kind of saying there. You do you, focus on what you're good at. Perfectionism is overrated. Just do it. Nice, Helen. Yeah. Good enough is great sometimes. When has that actually gone wrong? Nice, Steve. So what Steve I think is getting to there is I think sometimes we sort of overplay the impact of our gremlins because they feel very big for us inside our brains. Getting people to actually be very granular about going, well, when has this actually gone wrong? Almost, you kind of, you can perhaps do this with a friend, you're sort of calling yourself on it a bit. Well, how often is this a problem? And, what are the specific examples of when this shows up? What would you like to be? What's one thing you could do differently? Just keep going, keep those small steps really nice. Brilliant from Lucy there, just a reminder of how far you've come. That's why we've got Pride Postcard. That's why we've got that Pride Postcard exercise that I'm sure you've heard us talk about now. Sometimes just reminding people of what's going well, readdressing that bias in our brains towards negativity can be really helpful. Getting a bit of perspective, brilliant. Progress over perfectionism, yeah. What's the worst thing that can happen? Brilliant. That's actually one of my ideas for one of the specific gremlins we're going to come on to in a second. But I like that. I like worst case scenario planning. I find it really useful. When has this not been the case? Yeah, really nice. So kind of build a business case for the opposite. I think sometimes, again, they loom large, these gremlins. So to make them smaller, we need that perspective. We need to sort of see the other side. Listen to Brené Brown. Yeah. Maybe you might point them in the direction of a certain person or something to read, watch, or listen to that they might find helpful. Okay, so just a point there to really sort of stress test that. Like, I think we often do know what we could do. It's just sometimes the doing. It's sometimes just moving from the knowing to the doing that can be hard. And that's why lots of you are saying start small. That helps us to move from knowing to doing, starting small. What's something else that might help us to move from knowing to doing? So starting small, what else? So we know what we need to do now. Accountability, yeah, Anna, asking for feedback, accountability from someone else. So Anna managed to build on her own point there before I'd even asked the question, which was brilliant. So having an accountability partner or just someone else that you're going to share this with. If you say you're going to do something to someone else, you're much more likely to do it. Share, yeah, so anything you can do to share it. Feedback, brilliant, great thing to do. Often you magnify your gremlins in your mind. You ask for feedback, it shrinks them because you realize other people don't see it. Of course they don't see it or feel it in the way that you do. It's never as bad as you imagine, in my experience. Take the time to learn and reflect. Talk about it. And honestly, it never ceases to surprise me when sometimes I'll be talking to someone who I know really well, and certainly on the surface seems to have done a brilliant job of caging their gremlins. And I had this with the previous boss relatively recently, and she was like, I've got so much imposter syndrome. And I would never have, I know this person really well, I've worked for them. I would never have guessed they were going to say that sentence to me. I would never have guessed that was one of their gremlins. And it clearly was. She was describing it, and I was just thinking, just really proves the point that like these gremlins happen to all of us and to the best of us in those moments. And she definitely got a kind of environment that was causing that gremlin to get bigger. Find a place to practice outside of work. Really nice, Sarah. Capture some initial thoughts, normalize them. Yeah, if teams just talked about gremlins, if we heard everybody just talking about gremlins, suddenly again they just become everyday. I think when these are everyday things, because everyone has them, then it becomes so much easier to do something about them. And this one, I just wanted to take a moment on. This idea of fear of being found out or imposter syndrome. I think everybody has this at some point during their squiggly career. It's pretty hard to avoid, I think. So what action should we take? Fear of being found out or imposter syndrome. What are some of these small actions that might help us to move forward in the moments where we do have this sense of, oh, I'm not sure I'm any good at this. I'm second guessing myself. I feel like I'm doing a bad job. Because this will happen to all of us. And you will probably always have conversations with people where this is a thing for somebody. So what could we suggest for actions, do you think? If someone's got this kind of fear of being found out? Love that, Jamie. I think that's probably where I would always start as well. Remind yourself of your strengths. And I think alongside that, successes. If you're practically going to suggest an action to somebody, you'd probably say, write down a very small success at the end of every day. That would definitely, again, just readdress that bias in our brains. Yeah, it's at every level. You're right, Sean. Feedback we've got, brilliant. Understand where the fears come from, really nice, Nicole. So lots of people talking about strengths. Yeah, nice, Anna. Sometimes a bit of mental time travel is often what this is described as. Go back into your past. When have you felt like this before? What helped then that might help you now? Really good coaching question. So a bit of kind of going back into the past to then help us with the present. So a bit of time travel. Achievements journal. Yeah. Sometimes people have, I don't have one, but sometimes people have a folder in their inbox that's like their feel good folder or their celebratory folder. That can be, I did that actually more when I was in big companies. I was better at kind of collating the good stuff along the way. I think because often I needed it for like reviews and things. Oh, really nice. Who else can you get in the boat with? So yeah, who else could support you? There's a sort of involve don't solve point here. Like, who could you involve? Who could help you in that moment? Love that. Yeah, that Neil Gaiman journal, that was from Steve. Actually, I know Steve has had to leave this morning, but I'll give him a shout out for that. Yeah, the Little Black Brag book, really nice. If it's based on facts, it's not bragging. Definitely, Rachel. Really good. Don't ignore it, acknowledge it. Yeah, Emma, that's definitely the work of Susan David. So her point, she's a psychologist, great TED talk. If you've not watched her TED talk, she talks a lot about emotional agility, and that's what she would say. She would say we should use our doubts as data. If you ignore or avoid them, actually they will only get bigger or become more problematic. So that's kind of really good advice. So there's a bit about mindset and a bit about skill set here. Susan David, sorry, Anna, that was sort of me remembering as I went there. And so this is what I would encourage you to do as the final action for your gremlin. So you've gone through this process. You've got your when, you've got what happens, you've got your why to change for your stubborn gremlin. I'd then take my gremlin and sort of put a cage around it and go, what are all the small actions, mindset actions, skill set actions that are going to contribute to the caging? Can I share these with somebody? Can I get myself a bit of an accountability partner? How am I going to approach these actions? Is it I'm going to literally prioritize them? So I'm going to do that first, and I don't know, then I'm going to do that. Or am I going to prioritize them based on impact? Am I just going to try one first and see how I get on? I think that's completely acceptable when it comes to gremlins. You might just go, I'm just going to do very small successes, and that will be enough. So good luck caging your gremlins. We will clearly now take a break from gremlins for a while now. As you say, let's not give them too much power, but hopefully we've talked about them enough that we have shrunk them. If you are ever stuck with your gremlins, you can get in touch with us. Sarah@amazingif.com, Helen@amazingif.com. If you ever feel like you're not moving forward with them, you've got the awareness, but you've not got the action, get in touch. I love a gremlins based email. And usually just by sharing it with someone else, you'll get a different perspective. Or, talk to someone who's here this morning. You're all lots of like-minded learners. And look how far we got in half an hour there with all the great advice that you were giving each other. Thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed this. Next week, I think we are talking about how to have career competitive advantage, which starts off with Helen and I having a debate about the word competition and whether that was a good thing in a squiggly career or not. So see you next week to talk about that. Bye, everybody. Cheers.